Hey gardeners, check out these New England asters. You just can't beat this purple. It is early fall here in central Vermont and I'm in the middle of a wild meadow. None of these plants were planted, but not all of them are native. Like most wild areas these days, this meadow is a mix of exotic and native plants. There could even be a few cultivated plants that crept in here. And I think as gardeners, if we want to be good stewards for the environment and really help with the issues that are going on and the struggles our environment's having right now, we need to understand the difference between cultivated, native, exotic plants and understand the role they play in our gardens. So in this video, we're going to teach you a little bit about the history of native plants, teach you what it means to be a native plant, what it means to be an exotic plant, and what a cultivated plant is, and how they fit into the environment and what role they play. So there's a lot to learn. Let's get started. If we're going to understand native plants, we first have to understand a bit about ecosystems. So an ecosystem is a group of plants and animals that have evolved together over thousands or even millions of years in the same geographic location, and they've evolved to create a balanced system. Certain plants depend on certain insects to pollinate them. Certain insects depend on certain plants for reproduction or food sources. It becomes a really well-balanced system. And a native plant then is a plant that is in the ecosystem in which it evolved. So all the plants in an ecosystem are native in that ecosystem. If we take that plant out of that ecosystem and take it across the ocean and put it in a different ecosystem, it then becomes an exotic plant. So an exotic plant is a plant that's taken out of its place and put in a foreign place where it really hasn't evolved. And a native plant is a plant that is still in the ecosystem in which it evolved. So that's one aspect of native plants, but there's another as well, and that's cultivation. A few hundred years ago, humans figured out how to improve plants for their benefit, either to make them more productive or more aesthetically pleasing or better performers in the garden. So we've learned to change plants to our benefit. So if we take a native plant and start cultivating it and changing it for our own benefit, the more we change it, the more it becomes different from its original function and form it had in its ecosystem. So if we change it enough, it becomes virtually unrecognizable to the ecosystem. So very, very cultivated plants, even if they're in the same space where they evolved, if they're so cultivated, they may no longer have a function in that ecosystem. So when we look at native plants, we have to think about them in two ways. So a true native plant is one that's in the ecosystem in which it evolved, and it has not been cultivated by humans. It's in its original form. So two aspects to native plants: a sense of place in the ecosystem in which it evolved, and the second is the form in which it evolved that has not been cultivated. So a native plant can be either native or exotic when we think about where it is physically, or it can be cultivated or native when we think about the form it's in, if it's cultivated by humans or it's in its original form. Here's a great example. Take a look at this straight species of purple coneflower and look to the right at a cultivar recently introduced. I don't think this butterfly would even know what to do with this cultivar. It's so different than the original. So now that you understand the basics of native plants, it's time to learn some new terms. So we talked earlier about cultivated plants. So a cultivated version of a species is called a cultivar. So a cultivar is a modified version of an original species. So let's go back to our purple coneflower for an example. Here's the straight species of purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea. And here is a really popular cultivar called white swan. You can see they've changed the flower color from purple to white. So this is called a cultivar. Because it's a cultivar of a native plant that's fairly close to the original native plant, we sometimes call this a nativar. It's just a fancy term for a cultivar that's similar to its original native form. So nativars are becoming really popular, but it's a gray area. We don't really know, in most cases, if the changes that have been made to the original species are making it less valuable in the ecosystem. For example, does the white color change its attractiveness to pollinators? I'm not really sure. Some of these have been explored, and you may be able to get some data, but mostly we really just don't know. So this is a gray area that I think you have to navigate on your own and decide how close you want to keep to your native species to make sure you're doing the best job to support your ecosystem. Another term you're going to hear pretty frequently is the word invasive. Invasive is a general term, it can be used a couple different ways. It generally means a plant that grows so quickly and so prolific that it causes problems wherever you plant it. So, an invasive can be either an exotic invasive or a native invasive. So, we hear a lot of talk about exotic invasives doing damage to our ecosystem. So, an exotic invasive, as we learned before, because it's exotic, that means it's a plant that comes from somewhere else. It comes from a different ecosystem and it's been transplanted here into an ecosystem where it really doesn't belong. And because it doesn't belong here, maybe it doesn't have any predators or any competition. And so it just starts to grow prolifically and take over large areas. We call that an exotic invasive. But some native plants can also be invasive in the right situations. So if you're a gardener, think about you have an ecosystem, and let's take a plant like Canada goldenrod that's known to be an invasive. So Canada goldenrod, I live in New England. Canada goldenrod is a native plant in New England, so it's not exotic. It belongs in this ecosystem, but when you introduce it into a garden or an area that's been disrupted by humans, let's say you've plowed a field or you've cleared an area to create a garden, and you put Canada goldenrod in there, it is going to quickly take over the entire area because it's got no competition. In its native ecosystem, when it's in an ecosystem with its other plants and insects, it will be kept in check generally by the other plants around it. But if you introduce it into a wide open space or a space where it's introduced to plants that don't really compete well with it, it can quickly become invasive and take over large areas. So both exotic plants and native plants can be invasive in the right conditions. So keep in mind when you're a gardener, you're not really creating a full ecosystem, a naturally balanced ecosystem. You're creating a garden that's maybe an approximation of an ecosystem, but it's really going to be out of balance because it's created by humans. I think this is an important point. A garden is not the same as a naturally occurring ecosystem, but I do think it's the best we can do to help nature adjust to the disruptions that humans have caused. Let's be honest, humans aren't going anywhere, so any type of healing has to include us. Each of us has the opportunity to make the best of our own small piece of land. Complete restoration of our native ecosystem is a bit of a fantasy. We need to look forward and create a new system where humans and nature coexist together. Incorporating native plants into your gardens is a great way to start. So that about wraps up our introduction to native plants. I know some of this can be a little dry, learning terms and learning backgrounds, but it's really important if we're going to be responsible gardeners and real friends to the environment. It's important to understand these things. So thanks for sticking it out, and I promise things will get more exciting when we get our shovels in the ground and get our hands dirty and start planting. So thanks again, and we'll see you soon on Garden Human.